All right, there's still some points Mrs. Ikuta would like to share with us, and then after that we'll go with question and answer. So let's enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for putting up with me so far. 2 points that was made during the coffee break, so I want to address that. One is, I might have said it wrong. I didn't mean that way, but Amaterasu Omikami, the first God being, is actually female God. So I should have said God this with this stronger God this. And again, I want to remind you that the most ancient religion started with female being that is sacred. And somehow boys took over. And we better take it back. And another one is a little more serious one. For instance, my education was totally disrupted because by the time I got to be in 8th grade, the war became more serious. Many men were drafted, and I remember send-off parties at the train stations, singing patriotic songs, and women preparing them with a large flag and stitch on many little knots. And the men will write slogans like, "We shall overcome," "Be courageous, be strong," kind of things like that. And they put it around their midriff, and that's supposed to have warded off bullets so they can come home safe. Many of them returned blood-soaked with the remains. So that's one thing I wanted to add. Another one I wanted to add is because of this shortage of men, students began to work in factories. And since my family was lucky enough to move to rural area, the factories were in the rural area. And personally speaking, I was absolutely bored with the school. And my family ended up, after this wonderful place with my grandfather, my father was drafted. He was not there, but he was assigned to teach war games to male students in agricultural school. And they told us that we have to move to custodian's quarter. So we ended up living in the custodian's quarter. That meant, I'm sorry I keep talking about food and bathroom, but the bathroom was 7 classrooms away. Can you imagine 2 o'clock in the morning? It's kind of spooky to go that far, you know. Pass biology classroom with the skeleton staring at you. So that was but many students who were from the urban city center schools, they were taken to defense product factories, and they were bombed. There was the first target for U.S. B-29 bombers because they wanted to squelch all the military installations and defense industry. Many students died because of bombing. Fortunately, like I say, we were in a country place. I was making the float at the bottom part of a sea airplane. Now, you know, when you go to Alaska, you can see it as a tourist, you know, those seaplanes are taking off, and you can see some bunch of whales or something. So you have a more pleasant association. To me, it was pounding all those little nails into a seaplane. But because I had a full use of a library in agricultural school, I got to read anything I wanted to read, which kind of argues for favor of a home study program. when I got to U.S., I was more or less educated about science because I studied myself, including Einstein's theory of relativity. I read it in Japanese book in Japanese language, but I knew generally what it was about, so I didn't really lose out too much on that. Well, I was supposed to be making anti-war speech, but I'm beginning to sound like I had a good time, but it's not really so. Another thing that came up is, and this is really sad. I went to Doshisha Women's College. That's the college that the campus that my father went. So there's a family tradition, and I started there. And then American missionaries, most of them are congregational missionaries, started to come back. It was after the war. I sometimes went through Kyoto Station. Some of you might have gone to this gorgeous modern-looking Kyoto stations that was redone for the second time in 1995 or so. But at that time it was dilapidated, but Kyoto was spared from bombing because of so many national treasures. At least at that time, U.S. leaders were smarter than George Bush. George Bush allowed looting and destroying the priceless Mesopotamian things during Gulf War and current war. But at least 50 years ago, U.S. military was smart enough to honor national treasures in Kyoto. So the station was intact, but there were at least 50 Skinman-born war orphans, elementary school age kids, begging for food. And we didn't have enough food to spare. Some of them were too weak to beg. They lay down on a dirty, cold concrete with open sores, with the flies buzzing around their open sores. There was one kind of activist, a Buddhist sect, that just opened up their whole temple to collect those war orphans. And they fed them and sent them to school. Actually, I did some part-time work in exchange of room and board, but that's another story. At that time, with the missionaries' help, we started student YWCA. And our YWCA was not like, here, you guys go to YWCA or YM to do exercise. That's the first thing you think about. In Japan, YWCA meant studying Christianity, teaching of Jesus, and spirit of serving, and international connection. That's what those triangles mean, in case you don't know. And we went to this orphanage during the Christmas time to entertain them. And being a clown as I am, me and some of us in a college dormitory got together and came up with a very stupid, funny slapstick skit and took it to this orphanage. They lost capacity to laugh. They didn't laugh. Later, well, anyhow, that's when I said, no more war. That's when I said, I'm going to study social work. Until then, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. When I saw those kids in the orphanage, not knowing how to laugh, that was it for me. And that's what got me to Cleveland, because Japan doesn't have decent schools for social work. And if I want to make something of myself as a social worker, I had to come to America. And one of the teachers at the graduate school of social work in Japan happened to go to Case Western Reserve and study group work. So that was a very good person to help me to get reference and scholarship. So Cleveland hasn't been the same since Yoshiko ended up in Cleveland. Well, having said that, is there anyone who wants to ask questions? I'll take any. Yes.
The American military premised their bombing of population centers on weakening the will of people to fight. Was that in any evidence during the firestorm bombing of Tokyo or other cities? What was the effect of that?
Well, actually, we are so defeated. And again, that's another thing. I'm glad you brought up that one, because that's when I became very cynical about media. As you know, Japan has very well-known national paper like Asahi and Mainichi, and they lied to us for 4 years. Japan is winning, Americans are running away because our generals are too strong. That wasn't quite so, was it? So now I got in the habit of not even believing in New York Times. Having said that, we are so defeated, really. We're so exhausted. I don't think the U.S. needed any psychological warfare. We are defeated. Just the newspaper was not. And I'm sure that could be the element, you know. The bombing got us to that point. So, and also this excuse about to save lives, they dropped atomic bomb. Actually, they just wanted to stay one jump ahead of Russians, who are also planning to bomb. But that's, you know, another issue that I hope I can get invited so we can spend a whole hour for that. Did I answer your question, Soto? Yes?
Did the music of your grandfather just totally die during that session? Were you?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Actually, I didn't brag too much, but that was my uncle who studied in Bonn, Germany, and his son became very famous conductor, writer, and composer. And he did the Boston Pop 3 days before Arthur Fiedler played, and I even flew into Boston to watch his conducting. He's traveled widely, and he died about 3 years ago. But even the Prime Minister sent letter of condolence. And it's still newspaper, Asahi newspaper, that I'm so cynical about, but maybe I better not, because they have been writing about him or his music even now, 3 years later. So his name is Naozumi Yamamoto. Yamamoto is his last name. And that's my mother's younger sister's son. And this Naozumi's mother, which is my aunt, also died of exhaustion during the war. She had 7 kids scattered all over the place, no food. Her husband was working as a farmhand after all this wonderful education, and that was just too much. So those kind of things broke the spirit. Just a breakdown of family, so much losses. Give me another good question like that. Yes.
Historically, a lot of what American children see about the beginning of the war is the kamikaze pilots coming into Pearl Harbor. I cannot personally conceive of anybody talking me into do that. Was there some training or brainwashing or something that went into to make those young men want to kill themselves?
Well, that's a wonderful question again. I'm going to answer the question from a back door. so many people wonder why there are so many suicidal bombers in Israel. And they call them terrorists. They could be 17-year-old kids. When there's no more future, there's no hope of seeing the end of suffering, devastation, losses, they have nothing to lose. Choice is either be killed by, quote, enemy or occupiers' gun sooner or later, or get yourself killed doing something useful. And this is what's happening in Palestine, I think. That's my personal opinion. And jihad might be saying a few things to get them going, but if jihad was here in Rocky River, they couldn't talk our young men into doing that, because our young men today still see hope, future, and at least enough belly full of food for today. But in Palestine now, or in Tokyo, or whatever city in Japan, 50 plus years ago, there was no hope. And I just got so numb, and I had this very masochistic image of someone beating me. Maybe the physical pain is better than this despair. So that's a back-sided way of answering your question. I don't think they need any kind of persuasion or education. Just let them know how to fly the little discard plane one way and aim for smokestack of, in that case, American ships. And also they didn't have enough ammunition anymore. So as I was saying, I worked in a war factory, but the later I got, less materials came through the factory. So that's why I had time to read Einstein's, you know. So it's getting desperate. So we are told to train ourselves to fight with the bamboo. You cut bamboo on a sharp end, and you are supposed to poke those American soldiers with the bamboo sticks. And of course in Okinawa, the bombing was really severe, and it was coming from Japanese military as well as U.S. military. And Okinawa people were caught in the middle, and those girls, high school age girls, were forced to take care of injured, wounded Japanese soldiers in a cave and trenches with no medication. And when they heard that the U.S. is going to take over Okinawa, many of them committed group suicide because they preferred to be in control of their lives by committing suicide than being raped or dishonored. So that's part of the story. How much longer should I go? Oh, yes.
How would you describe the sort of viewpoint of Japanese people today toward Western civilization, given Western world, given this experience that you've had? How mended or not is it?
Well, that's a very good question. But before I get to that, I want to say that no matter how American influence is, mayor and city council of Hiroshima continues to be very steadfast about anti-nuclear. In fact, I'm very active with an organization called PAND in Cleveland, PAND, Performers and Artists for Nuclear Disarmament. I'm one of the board members. And I had honor of writing to the mayor of Hiroshima, asking him to send some the message of peace, which I did last year. Okay, so one part of Japanese psyche still is anti-war. Therefore, they resent any U.S. militarization. They still have that constitution that General MacArthur kind of drafted. This is kind of funny because my marriage drafted the constitution for Taiwanese, and now MacArthur drafted constitution for Japanese. And now, question is, should they change that part of the constitution? Personally, I don't want them to change. As far as the pop culture, Japanese are very funny people because when they get interested in one subject, they obsess. And they go beyond what Americans would dare do. So jazz music or rock and roll, they really do even more progressive things. So in that sense, they take in hook and line, whole 9 yards. So in that sense, they are very pro-American. But also, if you go to Japan, you cannot buy a doll with black hair because they think they are cosmopolitan. Dolls have kind of brownish hair. So that really means they are so, commercially and unconsciously pro-Western. And if you know how to read a Japanese newspaper, the difference between Chinese newspaper and Japanese newspaper, Chinese newspapers have all those so-called kanji, that's square writing with many strokes, and I call it hieroglyphic. Because each letter might have 3-4 syllables and meaning, complete meaning. Like American alphabet, letter B doesn't mean anything until you put some syllables and put OX, then we have a concept, it's a box. But in Japanese, okay. But they have to use so many American foreign words. So they use another alphabet called katakana. So if I spell any of your names, I write in katakana. And that's much simple letters with only 1 or 2 strokes. And because today's newspaper writes so much about non-Japanese things, at least 60% of writing is foreign language, spelled out in a corrupt pronunciation. That's why Japanese can not say, TH sound because it is so corrupted. Or, me too, R and L are real struggle. Yeah.
I was thinking the same question that she had, except one little different twist. And that is, what is the history of the kamikaze movement? I mean, is other people use it in war before World War II significantly, or was that the first time it was ever used?
Okay. Once upon a time, long time ago, like 10 millennium ago, I think. Remember, maybe you people are much better with the history of Genghis Khan from Outer Mongolia. They invaded Japan. At that time, they were into invasion mode, and they ended up in Hungary too, But they were threatening. And if you can picture southern part of Japan with a fleet of this Mongolian navy coming. And Japan was in dire danger of being invaded by those Mongolians. So they prayed into Shinto gods. And then in Japan, we call it typhoon. We don't call it, hurricane, but it's the same kind of thing. Horrific maybe 100 miles an hour wind whipped up and sank Mongolian ships. And they sank or ran away. Japan was saved and kept integrity. So that really means, kami means God. Kaze means wind. So it's a God-sent wind. So anytime when Japan gets desperate, of course, they wish for God's wind. And that's the name they used for a group of young people who committed suicide by flying into the battleships of the U.S. Navy. So that's how the history, it's really with the Mongolian about a millennium ago. But then, Americans came to Japan and horrified by the way American cab drivers drive, so then they named them kamikaze driver, Yes.
How old were you when the war ended, and how did you feel once you knew it was over? I know you said you heard a message from the used to be God saying he was no longer God, but how did you feel? What was that like for you?
Okay, so I was sort of equal to 11th grade. Now you know how old I am, but that's okay. And that's a really good question because it's about me now. So if you can picture, we were in this very rural agricultural school on a hill. There's nothing around it except school, no house around it. And my mother was stunned and she's kind of blank, wasn't helping me any. My father was still, he had to go back to military headquarters to be officially dismissed of his military draft. So I remember it was beautiful blue sky that day, and I went up the hill all by myself. And I kind of sat under a very tall pine tree overlooking the valley. And behind me is fantastic cliff with a gorgeous rock formation, very precipitous like this. And then I said, up till now I was forced to believe that Emperor is God. He's not God. Actually, I don't know whether I should use the word in this building, but I was pissed off. And you see, the thing is, that's another part that I didn't really go into because I was afraid of time limit. Part of this story is that my mother was a Christian, very westernized, high tea kind of thing. And she played piano or organ for the church, Christian church, all these years. So I grew up in Sunday school. I'm only child for first 10 years. So every time mommy goes to church to practice piano or conduct choir practice, I had to be there. So I was really immersed in Christianity. I was very proud of the fact that I was able to read children's version of Bible story. So when I was first grade, I could recite Noah's Ark and all that kind of biblical story, David and Goliath. And then when the war came and this right-wing dictator took over, the Christians were suspect, just like Muslims are suspect today. We are supposed to worship, supposing we are having church service on Sunday, Christian service. First we have to stand up, face direction of Tokyo. In our case it's east because we are in the west, bow to emperor. And then start our regular church service. would be very funny if we had to read the Ten Commandments about thou shalt not worship no other God, It just doesn't work. And then some of the ministers or Christians who had friends with American churches were suspect, just like Arab Americans who have some connection to, like mosque would be nervous. And some of the college professors who used to come to my grandmother's house talk about socialism, they got scared because some of them do get tortured and ended up in jail. So I don't know whether I'm answering your question or not, but that's how it went.
I just want to know your feelings.
Okay, so my feeling was, I was pissed off. And I was angry because initially I decided to be a Christian. And then because of so much pressure, I had to go underground. I still read the Bible in my own little room, but like in the classroom, teacher will say, who are Buddhists? Everybody raise their hand. Who are Shinto? Everybody raise their hand. Anybody else? I don't think I better say that. So I guess I kind of learned to be a little bit subversive when I was in the third grade. So in a way, I was kind of pushed around religiously. And then, having this conflict between my father's side and my mother's side, with my paternal grandfather being a Shinto person, and then my mother's side. So I was kind of pushed around on both sides all my life, and then the whole country started to push me around. Now you know why I was. And I said, I'm going to make this a mission to decide what I want to believe in. I was very serious about that. And that was a time, and then, with that in mind, I was able to go to Doshisha Women's College. And there are a few intellectual professors there. And my mother told me, when you go to Doshisha Women's College, do two things. One, master English language. Because of the international situation, we better manage English to survive. Americans are here. And that served me well, let's face it. The second one is make up your mind about religion. You don't have to be Christian if you don't want to. But you have to have very good reason to explain to yourself why you don't want to be Christian. I said, okay. So that's part of the reason why I was active with the YWCA, which had a lot more religious component. And at that time, Japanese intellectuals got into existential philosophy, like I think the most popular one was Sartre and Descartes. In fact, we used to have a drink song called Descartes. Descartes meant Descartes, Kant, and Schopenhauer. And that was a sign of intellectuals, and especially men, they used to sing the Descartes song, even though they didn't really understand all of that. But really, answering your question, if you know the way I understand existentialism is you hit the bottom, negate everything. There's no ready answer to say yes to anything. Power, no. Wealth, no. Health, no. Happy family, that's not the ultimate happiness. Nothing. So it sort of connects to really Zen Buddhism, which I didn't realize. But you start with more nothingness. And those existentialism was very useful. And that came from war-torn Europe, where they had to realize that negation. There's no glory, no victory, no justice. Start from scratch. So really I got into that. And then with the YWCA, we wanted to do pen pal. We started to write to some students why in Ohio State of all places, in Columbus, because they sent us a lot of care packages. And so I started to write about existentialism, but kids in Columbus didn't know what I was talking about. So you can ask more questions, but that's generally how my head was going. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you.